Howdy nerdy knitter, my favorite shawl shape is definitely a rectangular shawl. They're so easy to wear. But did you know there's actually more than one way to knit a rectangular shawl? There's actually 7 ways. We're going to look at all of them in this video. Before we do, I just want to say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer, and my goal is to help you become a more confident, adventurous knitter. Rectangular shawls are probably one of the most easiest shawl shapes to knit, and they're really easy to wear. Sometimes triangle shawls can be fun to knit, but they're a little more difficult to wear to figure out how to put them on your body so they don't look like an oversized bib. You don't have that problem with rectangular shawls. You can wrap it around your shoulders, or you can wrap it around your neck like a scarf. There's lots of different ways to wear them. Now, the first way is probably the simplest. You're going to cast on as many stitches as you want for the width, knit until the length is complete, and then bind off your stitches. Basically, a giant scarf. Scarves and wraps and shawls that are rectangular shaped can all be knit in the very same way. Like this example right here, Jared Flood's Guernsey wrap. This is knit using that basic cast on for the width, knit for the length, and then bind off method. You've got a great garter stitch edge and lots of really fun textured patterns in this wrap. Now, if you don't mind casting on a lot of stitches, the second way to knit a rectangular wrap can be really fun. You're going to cast on all of the stitches for the whole length of the shawl. Then you're going to knit till it's as deep as you want it. Then you're going to bind them off, like this example here. Helen Kennedy's Rippling Waves shawl. Now this shawl uses that method. You're casting on all of the stitches for the whole length of the shawl, so you get this stitch pattern that runs for the depth of the shawl shape, this beautiful rippling waves pattern. Then you're binding off along the other long edge. Now you can also knit a rectangular shawl by starting at the center by using a provisional cast on, and then you work from that provisional cast on out to one end of the shawl. You go back to that provisional cast on and put your stitches, those live stitches, back on the needle and then work out to the other end. An example would be the Deathly Hallows shawl from Knitting Magic, the official Harry Potter knitting pattern book. This shawl starts with that provisional cast on, and then you work out in both directions to create the shape and get that really pretty design. Now, if you're not a fan of that provisional cast on, you can flip this method and actually start from each end and graft to the center. So you'll start at one end, cast on your stitches, work till the center of the shawl, put those stitches on waste yarn or an extra cable for your interchangeable needles, and then you'd work the other half of the shawl, casting on the stitches for the other end, working to the center, keep those stitches live, and then work a Kitchener graft to graft both ends together. Joji Locatelli uses this method in her Cosmopolitan wrap to get the directional shape of that lace so both ends are perfectly mirrored. You work them both individually and then graft them in the center. Now those two methods are recommended if you want both ends of the scarf to be mirror images of each other, because usually you cast on at one end, might have a pretty stitch pattern, and you work to the other, but that stitch pattern is only going to run in one direction. If you want it to be a mirror image where it looks like it's running in both directions, either starting at the end or starting from the center out, then you're going to want to use a provisional cast on and work from the center out to the ends, or start at both ends and work to the center and knit a graft. Those first 4 methods will give you a basic rectangular shape, but you can also create a parallelogram style rectangle by knitting on the bias, and there's 3 ways we can create this shape. Now the first method for this bias rectangle shape is to cast on all the stitches that you want for that width or depth of the shawl, and then as you're knitting the length, every 2 rows, you're going to work an increase at one edge and a decrease at the other, and then repeat that. So you could work that on every right side row, and that would give a slant to your rectangle to give it more of a parallelogram shape, like the Adventurer Wrap and Scarf by Ambah O'Brien. This one has a really pretty lace pattern, basic garter stitch, but we've got some increases and decreases going on, so we get that bias shape. And you can see by the way the central double decreases are worked, they sort of run off the edge sideways instead of going parallel with the rest of the shawl shape. There's also a second way to get this bias parallelogram shape for your rectangular shawl, and it starts out by casting on maybe 3 stitches. If you've ever knit that grandma's favorite dishcloth or heirloom dishcloth that starts at one point and then you work yarn overs until it's as wide as you want and then you start decreasing down to the other end, this shawl shape is very, very similar. You're going to start in the same manner, working increases at both edges until it's reached the width that you want, and then at that point you start decreasing at one edge but continue working increases at the other edge for the length of the shawl, like our previous shawl, that parallelogram shape. You'll do that for as long as you want the shawl to be, and then you start decreasing at both ends to work down to the final tip. An example of this is the very popular Clapotis pattern by Gilbert. It has this fun drop stitch pattern that you're creating, but the shaping is that bias shape where you start out at a point and you work to the width that you want, and then you knit for the length, working those increases and decreases to keep it on the bias, and then you're decreasing both sides to work the other point. Now this last shape plays with that bias technique, and instead of a rectangle parallelogram, you get more of an arrow shape. You get that point of the arrow at one end and then the opposite point at the other. And this is done by working your decreases at the edges and working increases in the very center. So you get that bias going off in two different directions. An example of this would be Camp Wilkerson by Caitlin Hunter. If you look at the stripes in this shape, you can see that they're running off in two different directions because of that shaping. Now you can also work this in reverse and work your increases at the edges and the decreases in the center, and that would just reverse the shaping. You'd still get that bias arrow shape. Now if this feels like a lot to take in, don't worry, I've got some printables for you that you can download and practice making these shawl shapes for yourself. All 7 of them. All you need to do is click this link. You'll find it down below in the video description box. Fill out the email form and you'll get them right in your email box. And coming up in the next video, we're going to take a closer look at that bias shaping. You're not going to want to miss it. So check out this video right here, and I'll see you in the next video.